Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 481 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. And on today's show, we are hoping to, by the end of our time together today, create more so that we may consume less. Now, let's back up for a minute and I'll talk to you about me and my life. If you have been listening, you know that our book club selection for August, our book club is happening on August 5th, by the way, if you'd like to join, that's all in the show notes. But I'm breaking up with my cell phone. My cell phone has, the excessive use of the cell phone has negatively impacted my quality of life. And so I've been going through this 30-day phone breakup that's outlined in our book selection. And 2 weeks ago, I did a bold thing. I deleted social media from my phone. I deleted all the apps. I was scared to do it. I tried to rationalize why I didn't have to do it, but I did it. And I felt immediate, and I do mean immediate benefits. A weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I just feel so much better. I'm on my phone so much less, and I have the data to support that because of my screen time app. My screen time has nosedived since deleting social media from my phone. So I'm not turning back. I now know about myself that I'm a person who thrives, does better when social media is not at her fingertips. Okay. Now you might be wondering, what does that have to do with creating? Since I haven't been mindlessly scrolling on my phone as much, I've noticed that I have a lot more free time. And so I've sought to fill my newfound free time with what I like to call high quality leisure. So instead of binging on Netflix, let's say, I've been trying to get reacquainted with my old hobbies. I've been trying to find new hobbies, teach myself new skills. And the reason is I'm reminded of the wellness benefits I received in the past from creating. Back in my 20s, before I had children, I loved to create. I was a huge knitter, and I frankly haven't picked up my knitting needles in at least 10 years since my first daughter was born. But I loved knitting. I wasn't knitting my whole wardrobe or anything like that, but I just enjoyed knitting a blanket here or there, a hat here or there. I loved it because it felt meditative. It was relaxing. When I had a hole in my Afghan, let's say, I was able to fix the problem myself. I then felt better and good about myself. And so I wonder whether there's self-efficacy happening when we create with our hands. I also wonder whether the repetitive hand movements, especially with regard to knitting requires repetitive hand movements. If you knit, you know, but are there research-backed wellness benefits to repetitive hand movements? And spoiler alert, by the way, the answer is yes. We'll get into that a little later today. But what's my point here? My point is we used to be creators. These days, however, you know it's true. We are creators no more, by and large. We're consumers. And consuming has a lot of problems associated with it, right? When we consume too much, we experience stress, anxiety, depression. We know that if we're not careful, our possessions can possess us. They weigh us down physically and emotionally, don't they? So there is good news, and the good news is so simple. We can become creators or producers again. That's what we're doing today. Today, I'm offering up some research-backed suggestions for stepping into that frankly enjoyable realm of creating once again. Now, before we talk about ways that I suggest and research suggests you should and can be creating, I want to go back in time a little bit and discuss how we got here, how we became consumers and simultaneously abandoned our creative energies. So let's go back to the turn of the 20th century. We're in 1870s-ish. An awful lot is happening. And yes, before the Industrial Revolution, most household goods were either made at home or purchased locally at the corner store, let's say. There were limited choices for goods. But again, starting in the 1870s, a lot of things happened all at once. Number one, chain stores opened up towards the end of the 19th century. I'm talking Woolworths, I'm talking Macy's. And people, if funds allowed, they could take a train and go to a store. These big chain stores offered a lot more options than the local corner mercantile, let's say. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But chain stores began in the end of the 1800s. Another thing that happened around the same time was innovations in architecture. Stores could now have higher ceilings, which meant for bigger displays. Big windows replaced tiny ones on the outside of stores, on the storefront, so people could look in and window shop. Speaking of glass, there were now glass countertops and display cases. All of this meant, all these architectural innovations meant that people were enticed into stores more. And then finally, the third thing that happened that I want to highlight is that even those without access to trains or stores in urban centers, they could also get their hands on a new wide variety of goods. And that, of course, is thanks to the rise of the mail order catalog. And once the telephone was invented in 1876, I believe, that meant that people in the most rural of areas, thanks to the telephone and the mail order catalog, they could even get their hands on a plethora of goods. Now, even back in the 90s, I believe it was, Sears was sending out that gigantic phone book sized catalog, right? If you know it, you know what I'm talking about. I don't even know if Sears is still in business, but in the 1800s and towards the 1900s, the Sears catalog was, according to Richard Sears, the quote, consumer's Bible. Now, speaking of a plethora of goods that was all of a sudden available to all of us, instead of a single option for clothing and shoes, let's say, customers then became faced with dozens of options and varieties, whether they ordered it by mail or they found it at the local chain store or they went to a department store. There's a new level of competition in the market because there are so many different goods available. And what came onto the scene because of competition, you know it's true, and it is advertising. Once advertising began, all bets were off. And that's because advertisers do a great job convincing us that we need more. Advertisers, as we've talked about all the time on this show, advertisers create a void in our lives so that we try and fill it. Now, these days, fast forward again, from 1870s to 2024, many of us do have a void. And the void may be due to the fact that, again, our possessions are possessing us. Some argue that the void we feel is legitimate, and it is due to the fact that we have traveled so far away from our creating roots. So we're so caught up in this consumerist mindset, let's say. And by the way, that's not our fault. We are not bad for defaulting to consuming over creating, right? We have literally been trained to consume first and create whenever we can find the time, but we can't find the time because we're so overworked. But we forget our inherent need to create, don't we? And so the solution, at least today, at least in our time together today, the solution is to create more and consume less. Because if we spend more time creating, we will very likely spend less time consuming. Time is a finite resource. And if we're creating, we have less time to shop. So this is, and again, people much smarter than me, they argue that this is the way we move the needle of contentment back to the positive. They argue this is how we resolve our individual struggles regarding impulse buying, compulsory consumption, mindless buying, you name it. So let's talk about our hands for a minute. Have you ever stopped and really examined your hands and thought about the amazing marvels that human hands are? They are pretty darn amazing. No other animal on earth has hands like us. Even other primates, our closest relatives, their hands aren't quite like ours. So pre-industrial revolution, we humans, we were using these marvels. We were using these hands for intricate hands-on work. But what are we doing in 2024? You know it. I don't even have to say it. I'll say it because why not? We're not doing that intricate work with our marvels anymore, are we? We're doing simple movements. We're tapping on screens. We're swiping right, swiping left. We're pushing buttons. Some experts believe that our shift away from more complex hand activities could have consequences for how we humans think and feel. In research in animals in particular, this becomes plain. One researcher, her name is Dr. Kelly Lambert, she found that rats that use their paws to dig up food have healthier stress hormone profiles and were better at problem solving than rats that were given food in a bowl. Isn't that interesting? Dr. Lambert does see similarities in studies on people who engage in a range of hands-on activities like gardening, like coloring, like knitting. Those acts are associated with a range of cognitive and emotional benefits in humans, like improved memory and attention, like reduction in anxiety and depression symptoms. Oh my goodness, how amazing is that? Now, these studies have not determined specifically that hand movement is what deserves the credit. But researchers who looked into coloring, for example, speculate that coloring, using our hands as we color, might promote mindfulness. And mindfulness, of course, as we've talked about many a time on this show, mindfulness is really darn beneficial for mental health. And researchers who have studied knitting have found something similar. It's the rhythm and the repetition that has a calming, meditative feel. There's also evidence that hands-on activities can support learning, and that's because hands-on tasks tend to fully engage our attention, right? Now, there's one other hypothesis floating out in this arena, and it is that with depression, people experience something called learned helplessness. So that's what happens when people feel like it doesn't matter what they do. Nothing ever works. There is a hypothesis out there that suggests that working with one's hands is stimulating to the brain. And so working with your hands can help counteract learned helplessness. Like when you put in effort and you see a product, when you're knitting a sock, let's say, and you see a sock that you created, that builds a sense of accomplishment and a sense of control over your world that people who experience learned helplessness tend to not have. So what's the TLDR here? Too long didn't read. What's the TLDR? The TLDR is our hands are marvels. They were made to manipulate items in intricate ways. And while researchers don't exactly know why, using our hands in creative endeavors does seem in the lab to come with a range of wellness benefits. So I hope I've convinced you. There's the why. I hope I've convinced you that we should be using our hands for creative endeavors more. We're going to take our ad break, but when we come back, I have 6 suggestions on how exactly to do it. And they're not just suggestions out of my brain, listeners. They're research-backed suggestions. So we'll get into those 6 hands-on activities after our quick sponsor break. And we're back. Today we are officially here and now committing to a life of more creation and less consuming. Before the break, I tried to outline my argument, and I hope I did a good job. Our hands are marvels. They were made for intricate, hands-on work. We have lost that in our consumer society because we're buying what we need. We're not creating it. And so we're moving on to part 2 of today's show. So part 1 was the why, and part 2 is the how. How can we start to use our hands more? And you might be rolling your eyes and saying, Stephanie, that's so silly. We all know how to use our hands. Perhaps, but these suggestions I'm offering you up are research-backed benefits. So we got to talk about crafting first, obviously, right? I've been talking about knitting till I'm blue in the face. So let's start with crafting. What is crafting? Crafting is applying skill to create something valuable. And author Gary Rogowski, in his book titled Handmade, Gary argues that, quote, people have the need to put their hands on tools and to make things. We need this in order to feel whole. Long ago, we learned to think by using our hands, not the other way around. End quote. So what is Gary saying there? He's saying that as our species evolved, we did so as beings that experience and manipulate the world around us. Now let's just get to the good stuff, right? What are the benefits of crafting? Research has shown that crafting, regardless of the type of crafting you do, regardless of the medium you use, crafting has the power to bolster mood, improve self-confidence, and reduce stress overall. Oh my goodness, isn't that amazing? In addition, crafting has also been shown to improve mental agility, improve gross and fine motor skills, and decrease cognitive decline. All of that in knitting a sock. Oh my goodness. So when we're crafting, we are living truer to our primal potential, yes. And in addition to that, crafting can provide deep satisfactions that are hard to replicate in daily life, isn't it? So some other benefits of crafting, let's just go through them. Crafting allows us to express ourselves and communicate our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, right? It's a form of self-expression. Crafting helps develop those problem-solving skills and patience and attention to detail. I bring you back to my hole in my Afghan. Oh my goodness, there's a hole. When I solve the hole, when I figure out how to fix the hole, I'm developing my problem-solving skills. I'm cultivating something that I don't have much of, which is patience. So neat. Also, crafting allows us to create something tangible. It brings a sense of accomplishment. Woodworking, cross-stitching, quilting, you name it. Scrapbooking, whatever it is, crafting provides a source of pride because, oh my goodness, look what you made with your own two hands. And I will say too, anybody who has ever been to a museum knows that arts and crafts, they have the power to inspire. They have the power to provoke thought. They have the power to evoke strong emotions. And that's why arts and crafts, they can challenge societal norms. They can spark social change. So let's not think of it as, I'm just knitting an Afghan. You are perhaps sparking social change. Yes, you are. Now, this is anecdotal evidence, but it's evidence that abounds all the same. Ask anyone who regularly creates something, and they will tell you how much fun it is, how much they love it. Creating brings joy into lives. And I do worry that late stage capitalism sucks out everything from life that's not easily commodified. And that by default would mean that anything we enjoy for the simple enjoyment of doing it gets cut. We can fight against that by crafting. Now, related to crafting, but not quite the same, is creating art. So I'm talking a canvas. I'm talking oil pastels. I'm talking watercolor. I'm talking creating art. Research finds that when we create art, as opposed to simply going to a museum and viewing it, when we are the creator of the art, it's the creation of the art that leads to increased psychological resilience in adulthood. What is psychological resistance, you ask? It is the ability to handle stress. So cool, right? So this study I am citing, researchers had two groups, a group that created art and a group that went to a museum and viewed art. The group that created art had increased psychological resistance, a better ability to handle stress. Amazing. Now, I want to say here too, before we move on, it is natural to get attached to the outcome, right? So I'm going to just keep going with my knitting example. I should just title this episode the knitting episode because I'm going to talk about knitting a lot. I don't know why, but if we're knitting a hat, let's say, and that hat, once we're done, it's lopsided and it just doesn't look right. The fact that the outcome wasn't what we had hoped for, that can suck the joy out of the craft, right? It happens for me all the time. Anytime I bake a loaf of bread and it doesn't rise, that is a total bummer. And when I'm bummed, I'm discouraged from creating again in the future, right? I think that's normal. But I've been working on encouraging myself, and perhaps you too, if this resonates, to not get so attached to the final product. We likely are not crafting for the final product, right? We are crafting for the wellness benefits that we get throughout the process of creating. And the wellness benefits remain, even if that hat is lopsided, or even if the bread didn't rise, or whatever problem you encountered. It's about the process. It's about the process, not the product. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about active leisure. I know some of you are going to roll your eyes at this one and stop listening, but stay with me. Active leisure. You know the feeling, right? You have an evening at home planned, nothing on the calendar. You're looking forward to just relaxing. You just need a night off, right? So maybe there's some Netflix in your future. Maybe there's a good amount of social media scrolling. And then before you know it, your precious and leisurely evening at home is over and it's time for bed. And after extricating yourself from the couch, you find that you're more exhausted than before. How often has this happened to you? Raise your hand. Happens to me a lot. So what if instead of Netflixing and instead of the mindless scrolling, you instead roused within you the motivation to spend some of that leisure time actively doing something? Enter active leisure. If you prioritize active leisure as opposed to the mindless passive leisure, you may end your evening feeling better and rejuvenated. Now, Teddy Roosevelt in 1899, he said, quote, "I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life." Okay, enter eye rolls. I know you're all thinking, I don't want to do anything strenuous. I hear that. I hear that. I have barely had the energy to get out of bed some mornings. But research says that perhaps rejuvenation is found when we do something strenuous. Many people find, and you may be one of them, that inactivity leads to a state of depressive boredom. And the Bennett principle states that expending more energy in your leisure can end up energizing you more. So I'm talking about doing activities that might seem like work. Stacking logs, doing some carpentry, weight training, something that's active and strenuous. Activities that seem like work can actually offer many wellness benefits. One of them, of course, in addition to what I already outlined, is work is mentally freeing. Moving your body, and I'll say this as somebody who lifts weights and runs 6 days a week, moving my body and doing it in a strenuous way. So I'm not shuffling and I'm running, and I'm not lifting the 2-pound weights. I'm really working to my capacity. It helps me process emotions. Moving my body is somehow related to getting emotions moving and out of my body, particularly the negative ones. So I say all this to say I'm not expecting you to go stack some logs or, I don't know, insert strenuous activity. I'm not expecting you to go out right now and do it, but I am suggesting you keep it in the back of your mind, keep it in your toolbox for that next leisurely day you have at home. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about playing games and doing puzzles. Okay, so puzzles tend to be maybe a solitary thing, but the hands-on benefits are still there. The hands-on benefits, of course, we already outlined. Let's talk about board games for a minute. Board games, so you got the hands-on benefits. You're moving pieces, you're picking up money, paper money. You're doing all the things that a board game requires with your hands. But another benefit to board games is, of course, the social benefits. Board games in particular are known to provide the opportunity for rich social interactions. And as we know, because we listen to this show, social interactions and social bonds are so important for human wellness. We are social beings. And I will say here too, everybody loves a good video game, right? In the 90s, 2000s, oh my God, Super Mario, yes please, Sega, absolutely. But have you ever wondered why video games did not completely demolish the board game industry? Yeah, board games are still around and people play them all the time. Why? It's because board games provide rich social interactions. Research finds that playing games provides permission for what researchers call supercharged socializing. And supercharged socializing is what happens when interactions between people are of higher intensities. Higher intensity then is generally acceptable in polite society, let's say. It's not about the game. It's not about winning or losing. It's more about the loud belly laughs, the excitement, the whooping, the hollering, the high-fiving strangers. All of that happens over a board game, doesn't it? And this right here is the reason why video games have not and likely won't ruin the board game industry, right? Because in what other activity can you whoop, holler, do a dance, high five strangers, and just be your true and primal self other than on a board game? So play a board game, my friends. They're so great. They're great. I love them. All right, we're moving on to getting handy. Handiness, it is on the decline, right? And that's because it's no longer essential to be handy for your life to function smoothly. You can outsource, you can buy new. But what happens when we outsource, or what happens when we replace and buy new? Yeah, sure. Both of those activities does offer up some more free time. Free time means leisure. We can do what we want at our leisure. But by and large, let's be real. What are we doing with our leisure, everybody? We're heading to a screen and we're sitting on it. So on and on the hamster wheel goes. So we're spending money to outsource the problem instead of fixing it ourselves, so that we get more free time. But how many of us are actually using that free time for high quality leisure? Very few. We're just sitting on our phones and we're scrolling. That's a problem. So my suggestion here is to get handy, learn a new skill, perhaps even make it a self-sufficient skill, perhaps canning like we talked about on Tuesday. If you missed that episode, definitely check it out. Maybe you learn how to change your own car oil. Maybe you figure out how to install a new light fixture. Maybe you refinish a piece of furniture. I must say, I refinished so much furniture last year and I absolutely loved it. It was the highlight of my days. Hard work. I'm not going to lie. Stripping paint off of furniture is hard work. That brings me back to strenuous activity that we talked about earlier, but rewarding work. Ask anybody who's handy how they learned their skills. They will say either I learned it from, my parents, or they'll say I got on YouTube. Just know any new skill you want to learn, you can find out how to do it on YouTube. Get on YouTube and teach yourself something. Get handy again. All right, we have two more. I have two more suggestions, and they're pretty quick. The next one, of course, is to write a good old-fashioned letter. In a small study of university students, Norwegian researchers compared the neurological effects of writing by hand versus typing on a keyboard. And guess what they found? Handwriting is associated with far more elaborate brain activity than keyboard typing. Why? With handwriting, you have to form intricate letters. You have to make finely controlled hand and finger movements. Act of forming a letter activates, like a letter, A, B, C. The act of forming just one letter activates distinctive memories and brain pathways. But when you type, every letter is produced by the same super simple finger movement, right? And so you're using your brain a whole lot less than if you were using a pen and paper. Researchers also suggest, and they say that more research is needed, but they do wonder whether understimulation of the brain via all the constant typing may lead to deficits in attention, memory formation, and problem solving. Wow. Maybe you write a letter, write a good old-fashioned letter again, or journal. If you have nobody to write to, I understand, but get a pen and paper and journal and start journaling to get those hands-on benefits of writing. I will say here too, so if you follow me on Instagram, a couple weeks back, I poked a little fun at cursive being taught in schools. I made a little tongue-in-cheek comment about how we should be teaching real-world skills instead of cursive, and a couple people got a little mad at me. That's fine. People get mad at me all the time, but I stand corrected. I am hereby correcting myself. I think perhaps, yes, real world skills should be taught in schools. Absolutely. And as a teacher, I feel confident in saying that without criticizing teachers. It's not teachers who make the curriculum. I do think that real world skills should be taught in our public schools. That's number one. And I stand corrected. Perhaps cursive is also an important skill that needs to be taught. So maybe less over focus on math, maybe a little more cursive. I don't know. All right, we're moving on to my final suggestion for you and me today, and that is to play an instrument. You don't have to play it well. Just learn to play an instrument. I never played an instrument. I think I played flute for like 6 months, and then I realized how hard it was, and I quit. And my mom let me quit. And looking back now, in terms of what I learned in my childhood and what I wish I stuck with, even though it was hard, instruments number one, and other languages is number two. Those are two things I wish that I did more of when I was a child. And my oldest daughter now is playing violin, and she likes it, but she's no yo-yo ma. Let's put it like that. I'm not going to let her quit so easily, because the research into musical training on children is deep, wide. There's so much. Children who undergo musical training, they have better verbal memory. They have second language pronunciation accuracy. They have higher reading abilities. They have greater executive functions. Learning how to play an instrument as a child may even predict academic performance and IQ in young adulthood. Holy moly. The more you practice and the longer you practice, so the longer your practicing sessions are, the greater degree those benefits I just mentioned are observed. Holy moly. So what does this all mean? It means that learning how to play an instrument, musical training, has an awful lot of benefits. And the reason is that playing an instrument provides a foundation for a range of skills and therefore fosters cognitive development. So play an instrument, even if you're an adult. One of my friends, and I'm so excited for him. I'm so proud of him. He wanted to learn how to play the piano. So he got himself a keyboard. He got himself, I feel like it's Guitar Hero for the keyboard. I don't know what it's called. And he's been teaching himself how to play. He's gotten really good over the years, and he loves it. I go over, he sings for us, he plays the piano. I love it. And he loves it too. You're never too old to learn how to play an instrument if you're interested. Now, my final word today comes from last week's interview guest, Laura Uldaney. Laura says, quote, "When you put yourself in the role of consumer, you deny yourself the opportunity to step into the role of producer, from where you can express your creativity, have the satisfaction of meeting your own needs, and save money, and maybe even make money." So less consuming, my friends, more producing. I hope I convinced you today. Show notes are at mamaminimalist.com/381. We will be back on Tuesday, where we're discussing values-based spending. What on earth is values-based spending? That is Tuesday's episode. I will see you then. Have an amazing weekend. If you need me, please reach out. I'll see you Tuesday, and take care.